There you go. Dylan Taylor, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you doing?
I'm terrific, Ben. So happy to be here.
No, thank you. We just got through Thanksgiving, so as we're the back end of that, I don't think it's too late to say, thank you, particularly for coming on today's episode. You're definitely one of the people that I've wanted to speak to for a while now. Well, let's just jump straight into it, if that's okay.
Of course.
So, as the chairman and CEO of Voyager Space Holdings, can you share the vision and mission behind the company's formation, and how does it aim to impact the space industry?
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. Yeah. So my view on what we're trying to achieve in our industry is and I'm in the camp, Ben, that says space is the next big thing for civilization, right? So I'm in that camp that says space is a tool for transformation, that it's a prism by which we can shift our perspectives and have a better world and treat each other better. So I'm in that camp. And if you believe that to be true, then the way I've approached the industry is what's holding us back, right? What do we need? So earlier in my participation in the industry, what I perceived the bottleneck was early stage capital. We weren't getting enough early stage companies funded. And a lot of the people in the industry were lamenting the fact that we weren't getting venture capital. And I was trying to explain that we're not going to get venture capital until we gestate these companies to a stage that the VCs will be interested. So I spent a lot of my time and money focused on that early stage capital formation. I think that has gone well. We've now taken companies full circle where we raised angel capital, then later venture capital, and actually taken some of these companies to an exit, either an acquisition or a public market listing. So I think that's going reasonably well. What I perceived maybe 4 or 5 years ago that wasn't happening particularly well is that the industry wasn't scaling particularly well. And my notion on that was that if you look at how share typically is aggregated in industries, it's either strategic companies that are aggregating share or, let's say, private equity as a financial investor. Neither are particularly well suited to our industry, right? Because these founders, these new space founders who are geniuses in their own right and have amazing technology, selling to a Lockheed or a Boeing or an Airbus or a Northrop, that's not a win for them, right? Many of them left those companies to start the ventures that they have now taken to this level. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge for strategics. And then on private equity, which I respect tremendously, it's a necessary part of the economy. This is really an operator's challenge, right? Because it's not assembling market share, it's assembling capability. So if you look at why the prime contractors, the big four, so to speak, control most of the economics in the industry, it's because they're the most capable, right? They're at the apex of capability. So the idea would be, how could you be the best of both worlds? How could you be a new space company, flexible, adaptable, innovative, but yet have enough capability where you could be a safe pair of hands for a large prime contract and ultimately get infrastructure built in space? Because now that we've built reliable, reusable, relatively inexpensive launch, the next phase in our evolution as an industry is to get that infrastructure layer built. So that was the notion behind Voyager. And we initially had acquired a couple of companies that were sort of high technology. And then we also believed that NASA in particular was going to privatize commercial LEO destinations, specifically the International Space Station. So we made a key acquisition in NanoRacks, a company much beloved in the industry, largest commercial user of the International Space Station. And based upon some other capabilities we brought to the table and other investments we made, we were able to make a compelling case that we should be a prime contractor on one of the contracts that NASA awarded for the replacement to the International Space Station. We were a winner alongside Blue Origin and Northrop. So that was obviously a seminal win for the company. It validated the model. And since that time, we've actually won additional prime contracts in other areas of the industry. And then most recently, we have signed a joint venture, transatlantic joint venture with Airbus. And that's sort of bringing the European market to the fold. And then most recently, Northrop, which was one of our competitors on the program, has now merged their program with ours and joined our team. So we're feeling very good about where we're positioned on that. Our project is called Starlab, and it's focused very specifically on research. So that was the idea behind Voyager, and we're really focused on building that infrastructure layer and trying to be the best of both worlds between new space and old space, so to speak.
Mm. Wow, I don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many companies you mentioned there that we could take a deep dive into. Um, but I'm quite interested in your investment philosophy. Why is space so different in terms of investing? Obviously, it's longer term. You have to
Mm-hmm.
think in decades as opposed to getting a return in 18 months or 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you approach investment decisions in the space industry? Do you have a sort of strategy, or has that changed over the years?
It's evolved. I would say early stage, it's 100% the team, right? So if I'm talking, I don't do a lot of early stage investing much currently because I'm running Voyager and it's hard to deconflict a lot of those investments. But when I was doing a lot of early stage investing, if a company would say, well, we've got this really great idea, we need you to sign an NDA and then we can talk to you about it. I would never do that because the idea actually doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It's all about the execution. It's all about the team. I don't know of a single business plan ever created, to my knowledge, that was implemented exactly the way it was written. There's always pivots and tweaks and tacks. And so it's really all about the team. I think later stage companies, it really is about the capability. Team really matters, of course. It always matters. But if you don't have commercialized technology, you don't really have a capability. So I'm really focused on that. Is the tech real? Is it commercialized or can it be easily commercialized? And does it unlock a higher part of the value chain by virtue of bringing that capability, into our company? So that's the way I think about it currently.
That makes sense. So, in terms of some recent acquisitions, or tell me if I'm wrong and they're not that recent. So you acquired companies like Altius Space Machines and Exo Markets. How do
Mm-hmm.
these acquisitions align with your current strategic goals, and what do those two bring to Voyager's portfolio?
Yeah, Altius was actually our first acquisition. Uh, Terrific technology. Specifically, they have grappling technology, so-called dog tags that are on the OneWeb constellation that allows you to grapple with hardware on orbit, which is really important for satellite servicing, for space debris cleanup, and things like this. They also had some very excellent robotic tech as well that we thought was important for our future technology roadmap. Exo Markets is actually the parent to Nanorax that I mentioned earlier.
Mm.
So it's pretty much just a holding company that held Nanorax and some other assets, including a a not a nonprofit, but a public benefit corporation called Dream Up. And ESG is an important focus of ours, and especially unlocking and inspiring the next generation of talent. So the fact that they had that public benefit corporation was also very, very interesting to us.
Absolutely. What trends do you currently observe in the space industry? As I said before the call, I saw you speak at the International Astronautical Congress in
Mm-hmm.
Azerbaijan, and I think that's one of the many reasons people go from anywhere around the world to conferences like that, is to try and get ahead of the curve and find out
Mm-hmm.
where the industry is going. What trends are
Mm-hmm.
there in the space industry, and how is Voyager going to attempt to capitalize on these trends and lead them in a lot of ways?
Yeah, well, I think the evolution of sort of the big four within new space, I think, is likely to be a trend. If you look at industries, there's sort of a natural 80-20 rule. If you look at most things in the world, there's the natural 80-20 rule. And so I think as these new space companies get larger and more capable, there'll be a shakeout. Some won't survive. Others will be integrated into larger new space companies and will ultimately have, similar to the large prime contractors, will have a big four, so to speak, within new space. I think that plays out by the end of the 2020s. So within the next, call it 6-7 years. So I think that'll happen. I think the capital markets have told us that having a PowerPoint presentation and no real tech and no real contracts is not going to be invested in, right? Heretofore, let's say the last 4 years, it was pretty easy to raise capital. Now I think it is also easy to raise capital if you're a great company, because you can always raise money if you're a great company. But I think some of the lesser companies, broken cap tables, maybe their technology isn't as real as previously believed. Those companies, I think, either go to zero, many of them, or they're going to have to be recapitalized and or acquired by a larger company. So I think that's a big trend as well. And then just lastly, the big three areas that we're really focused on is commercial LEO destinations, so destinations in low Earth orbit, satellite servicing, and the ability to move hardware around on orbit. This includes space debris cleanup and servicing satellites. And then the third is really what I would call cislunar infrastructure, basically from the GEO to the moon and actually including the moon. That's going to be a big mega trend for the next 20, 30 years. But I think it's starting to really get real here with many moon landings, rover landings happening in 2024. So that should be pretty exciting.
And all those focuses, they're clearly either relatively close to Earth, to the lunar surface, or benefit humanity back on Earth. Is that a sort of conscious decision not to invest in companies like asteroid mining, or do you think that there's just a sort of mindfulness of investors that they want to see the benefits, and they're more sort of socially conscious of the benefits back to Earth as well? So as you say, not just investing in a PowerPoint company, but looking for tangible companies that do something in space that benefits us back on Earth. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think the short answer is yes. But keep in mind, I think some of these longer term business plans, and I've invested in asteroid mining companies personally. My family office has. I think those are important parts of the gestation. I think some of that technology has dual use, so I wouldn't rule those things out. I recently invested in a radiation shielding company. That's important, of course, for the Earth Moon system, but it's really, really, really important for deep space, right? So those are the kinds of technologies that have applicability to the here and now. But if we don't further commercialize and refine those technologies, deep space becomes impractical. So I try to look for areas in the industry that are dual use in that way.
That makes a lot of sense. So just sort of taking a bit of a step in a different direction. Space for Humanity is another bow to your business arm, I would say. Tell us briefly about the mission and focus of Space for Humanity, and what recent activities and goals the Space for Humanity have.
Yeah, sure. So the notion was two things were happening. One is commercial spaceflight was about to happen. This was founded in 2017. And there was a big narrative, and there still is, about sort of billionaire boys club and what about the rest of humanity. So that was one issue. Second issue is this notion of the overview effect, and how do we gift that to more and more people from different communities so that they could go back to their communities and talk about the power of space to transform. So those were the two ideas I had in my mind. And I thought, well, one way to do this would be to have a nonprofit dedicated to sending everyday citizens to space, paying for their ticket in exchange for some kind of a fellowship where they're committed to spreading the gospel, so to speak, about how important space is, but then also doing some kind of fellowship here on Earth to make the Earth a better place. So that was the idea behind it. We've actually sent several people to space, which blows my mind. The first was Kachev from the United States, was a Mexican national, amazing story. Crossed the border undocumented with her mother when I think she was 7 years old. Didn't speak much English and had a dream of working for NASA. She was at McDonald's, working at McDonald's, and taught herself English, got herself into community college, worked her tail off, got herself into UCLA engineering school, and ultimately got a job at JPL. So she was selected. She's amazing. She's a celebrity now, both in the US and Mexico. meets with the president of Mexico regularly, is forming a STEM education center together with the Mexican administration. She was on the cover of Vogue. There's a Barbie doll after her with her Space for Humanity jumpsuit, or spacesuit. So this was sort of the ideal candidate, right? This is someone who can really inspire a ton of people who weren't necessarily aware of space at all, much less the power of space to transform. We later sent Sarah Sabri, who is actually the first African-born female to go to space. She is an Egyptian national. She's done an amazing job as well. Is really making great things happen and is quite inspiring to women in North Africa and beyond. And then there were two other citizen astronauts that we co-sponsored along with Virgin Galactic, the first Caribbean mother-daughter astronauts to go, and they went on Virgin Galactic. So, and in addition to that, Rachel Lyons, who deserves most of the credit because she's been the executive director for several years now, she's now transitioning to the board. She really has turned Space for Humanity into really more of a social movement where they have a huge following and many, many, many people who are advocating for more democratization of space and talking about how important space is to really transforming the way we think about ourselves and humanity and the Earth. So very, very, very proud of Space for Humanity. And it's far, far, far exceeded any expectation I had when I founded it back in 2017.
And that's relatively quick as well. I mean, that's 6 years, and you're obviously leading and involved in. I won't ask you how many companies because you probably don't know, but it might be up to 100 in some way. But Space for Humanity is one that it's sort of one of the most well known, and by nature of what its intention was. So congratulations for that. It's truly amazing.
Thank you.
Speaking of all your companies, and I don't know if you consider them your babies, but do you have a favorite, or do you have some that are sort of close to your heart and perhaps you get more sort of personal drive from, apart from Space for Humanity, because obviously that's the clearly paying it forwards, but are there others that you're particularly proud of on a personal level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say Voyager really is my baby right now because I think it's capable of doing really significant things. Building the replacement to the International Space Station is probably the largest infrastructure project going on in space that I'm aware of. And we will pull that off. That will happen. And so that inspires me. That makes me proud and excited. And I think it's just getting started. We have ambitions at Voyager to go even deeper into space, to your earlier question. Once we sort of help commercialize LEO, we'll look deeper ourselves, maybe to Venus, perhaps. Mars is already taken, as we know. So I would say Voyager. I also founded a media company called Multiverse Media Group, really focused on just getting the message out on we go to space to benefit Earth. That company recently merged with Space News not too long ago. I'm not involved in the everyday running of the company, just a shareholder. But the notion that you can have an integrated media company that's really helping tell the stories via book and film and news and information, I think that's powerful as well. We're not doing media particularly well in our industry, and I think we're vulnerable to people who are anti-space and think it's foolhardy and think it's a waste of time and resources. I think we need to have well thought out messages that point out that that's one view, and we're sympathetic to the underlying commentary that supports that view, but it's not actually correct. We go to space to benefit Earth.
That's a very important piece of the puzzle, and I'm glad you acknowledge that, which is one of the sort of motivations for doing the podcast, really, because I always ask my friends, do you know about the Artemis missions? And no one in the UK has ever heard of it, unless you're in the space choir and you're into that. So that's definitely a missing link. Well, I can't believe we're way over halfway through the chat, and we still haven't mentioned your experience in space. So you went to low Earth orbit with Blue Origin. Just one question on that, really, that I'd like to sort of touch on. How did that experience affect your first of all, your thinking on how you'd like to work with Blue Origin,
Mhm.
and how has that affected how you run your businesses?
Right. Well, it was a life changer, Ben, truly. I told myself I wouldn't have expectations going into it, but the fact is I did. And they were quite high. I expected this transcendent moment in my mind to be blown and to have this
Mm,
spiritual revolution and change my life and all that, which is just not fair to put that expectation on a suborbital flight. But the fact is, it was 1,000 times better than that,
mm,
in a way that I think doesn't lend itself to language, frankly. Um, so it's tremendously profound. And what I would say is it's really uh, created a greater sense of urgency where I felt like I was on the right track and doing the right things to help the industry forward. But now I have a fire in my belly to make sure every day we're really pushing that hard because I know how important it is. And meanwhile, the world's struggling a bit. I think most people would agree with that. And so I feel this huge sense of urgency that we need to take this next step as a civilization and hopefully change our perspective and the way we think about Earth and the way we think about each other.
yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you're obviously sort of space tourism is something that you've experienced and are involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do you see the evolution of the space tourism market, and what role can companies like Voyager play? Obviously, Space for Humanity is making it accessible to all, but when you start talking about space hotels and that kind of thing, what's your vision, and how are Voyager and Blue Origin gonna focus on that?
Yeah, I see it very similar to air flight, right? So if you think of suborbital flights as sort of the barnstormers, these were these planes that were flying, maybe 30 miles, 20 miles, and they were going from farm to farm in places like France, the UK, and the US. And that was a joyride, and it was quite dangerous, and it was quite expensive.
Mm,
That's sort of kind of where I think suborbital is. Orbital is obviously a different category of cost and risk. Um, but I see that really evolving into a more commercialized infrastructure where we're sending more people to low Earth orbit. To your point, we have not necessarily just the International Space Station as a destination, Starlab and Axiom Station and others, I think, will host astronauts. I think that's important. But ultimately, to continue the analogy, you have the barnstormers, you have sort of maybe coast to coast flights. And now for $1,000, I could hop on a flight here in Denver and be at your doorstep in the UK in 8 hours, right?
mm,
Which is amazing to think about. Think about the richest people in the world, even 100 years ago. J.D. Rockefeller, he wasn't able to do that, right? That technology didn't exist. So we've not only created the technology, we've democratized it, which I think is really important. So I see spaceflight being on a similar path. Now, all that being said, there will 100% chance be a fatality. And so what I worry about a bit is space has been a zero defect industry really since Columbia, but before that, the Challenger accident. The cost difference between 6 sigma and 4 sigma is probably 10x, right?
mm,
And I think as an industry, it's it's an unfortunate thing to say, but I think we need to be comfortable with a level of risk because otherwise it will be too expensive. It will never be democratized. And secondly, heaven forbid, when there is an accident, the whole industry will shut down. And I just think we need to think through that ahead of time and realize that opening up any frontier, any new technology, any new endeavor in humanity always comes with risk. It cannot be risk free, especially something like space,
mm.
which is incredibly complex and wrought with many failure modalities. So I do worry about that a little bit because I think we're at the stage of the industry now where heaven forbid we had a anomaly with humans on board. I'm not sure commercial spaceflight would recover from that. at least not for many, many years. So I am concerned about that.
Sure, and I guess that's why it's good that it's a new industry, and the more people entering the market, the more you create a market, and then it's less likely to be so dependent on, you know, something happens to a CEO of one of the big launch companies, and then that
Right.
affects the whole market. So the more players, the better. Um, just on that public-private partnership,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you're for it. I think a lot of people in the industry are. But how do you see it? How do you see it evolving? Do you see governments and more as a taking the back seat and letting private companies use the capital and taking the risks? And how do you think that's going to change? Do you think that will change?
Yeah, I think the model for commercial cargo and commercial crew, I think, is a good one. So instead of making the space shuttle, NASA has said, look, we're going to pick a couple of anointed rocket providers and ultimately just buy services from them. Now, where I think it hasn't worked particularly well, I don't think it was anticipated that SpaceX would be uh, far and away, running circles around everyone else. So um, an unnamed NASA person who I can't name, but I'll refer to what they said is the only thing worse than a government monopoly is a private monopoly, right? And so I do think we need more diversification in the service providers. But
Mm,
the model in general, inverting the model, where instead of owning and operating the hardware, the government is utilizing the hardware as a service provider essentially. I think that is the right model. Why? It's cheaper. I think we've demonstrated that with launch. There's more innovation, and ultimately, I think, create new markets where the government wasn't necessarily seeking new markets because that wasn't their mandate. Their mandate was to service their own portfolio.
mm,
So I think that model is better. But again, I think to your point, back to what we were just talking about with suborbital, it can't be a single company, right? There have to be multiple capable players for this model to work well.
sure. And just looking to the future, um, from your vantage point,
Mm-hmm.
what do you? This is a big question, but what do you anticipate as the next big trends in the space industry? Um, assuming not everyone can start a launch company,
Mm-hmm.
where do you think the next gold rush is going to be? Or is it a case of it's a whole new economy and anything you can think of, there's going to be a boom for it?
I think it's ones and zeros, Ben. I think, in short, it's going to be information technology. And I say that because we have a revolution of hardware being sent to space. That hardware can be, hyperspectral in nature. You can have a lot of data layers. AI is real. We used to call it machine learning, but now we call it AI. But it's very real. And I've just seen the evolution. It was an early beta tester, if you will, for ChatGPT. I've seen the evolution between 2, 3, 3.5, 4, and now I think 5 coming out. And these are 1,000x improvements every step of the way. So,
Hmm.
and that's happened in 24 months. So if you extrapolate that out, even another 24 months, I think it's pretty astonishing what that's capable of. And so I think data collection and perfect information about the Earth will pivot us from what has happened to what will happen. And if you look at the value of information, predictive information is way, way, way more valuable than, what time does my bookstore open? Um,
Mm.
or what's their phone number? Right? That's sort of what the Google model has been. So I do think it's a multi-trillion-dollar data set we're building in space. And if you believe that to be true, by definition, the components that sort of aggregate to that capability should aggregate to this larger number. So I think it's really data and information that will revolutionize space finance, space investment, and ultimately provide the returns that many of these investors are looking for.
That's fantastic advice. As someone that did an MBA over COVID, I was just thinking how if there was to be a space MBA program, you would be the person to head that up. Not that you haven't got enough on your plate, but because there's so much value here in terms of thinking about the space industry on a entrepreneurial side.
Thank
How
you.
to come up with an idea. Um, you've obviously, you're not at the end of your career by any means, but when you are at the end of your career, um, do you hope to have well, let's say, what legacy do you aspire to leave? Is there one, you've been to space, you've done so much. Is there one particular project or legacy you'd like to leave for the space industry and humanity?
Yeah. It's interesting because I've been asked that question in various forms uh, frequently over the last couple of years. It's going to sound trite. It's going to sound probably insincere, but the honest answer is I feel like I've accomplished everything that I ever hoped to accomplish in the space industry. So I'm more focused on helping other people achieve their dreams than I am on my own dreams. And in a way, of course, I'm sort of living vicariously through these people I'm mentoring and helping along. But I really am focused more on the next generation of leaders and the next generation of people in the industry. I get a lot of joy. I had a mentor one time who called it reflected glory. He
Hmm.
said, Dylan, when your reflected glory is more important to you than your personal glory, then you will have achieved, wisdom, essentially. It was a very Zen-like comment, but I get it now. I understand it now, and it's true. And
Hmm.
I think giving is much more gratifying than receiving.
Touche. And yeah, paying it forward is something we have to do if we want to grow the light of consciousness in the
Mhm.
universe. And
For sure.
if you're into sci-fi, you read about multi-generational ships and all this kind of thing, and you have to think
Mhm.
longer term if you want to do anything big in space. Um,
Right.
Dylan, thank you so much. It's been great to chat to you. I hope to speak to you again. Thank you for everything you do, and good luck with everything in the future.
My pleasure, Ben. Great being here. Thank you.